Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. We're going to do a little live Q&A session. It's good to be back. We've been traveling a little bit. Cheers to all of you. Please chime in the comment section. Let me know what your questions are. I see some good stuff has already come in already. I wanted to do this Q&A because there's some there's been some questions from various outlets, Instagram and YouTube, that I wanted to get caught up on. A few things caught my eye. And just to make a couple of announcements as well. I mean, my gosh, a million things have sort of been going on. I just wanted to just try and catch everybody up on everything that's happening. Some things I think that many of you might be interested in, either on the philosophy front or the fitness front. I'll say this: if you're interested in all the philosophy stuff, tomorrow evening, Friday evening. I know it's not the best time for people. I'll be doing a sort of live presentation on contingency arguments over at the Reason and Theology channel, hosted by Michael Lofton. So I invite you to join me there. I'll be actually sharing from a paper of mine, hopefully soon to be published, where I've developed my own sort of formulation of a contemporary contingency argument. So get a sneak peek at that. That will always be fun. It's a great channel. So if you're into philosophy and theology, check out Reason and Theology. That's really cool. There's been a lot of action going on at my Substack recently. I've had a number of new posts up there. So again, the Substack is mostly philosophy content. But I think there's some interesting stuff over there. So y'all might want to check that out. I'm going to link it right now. Please subscribe. Hop on the email list there. On the fitness front, real quick, let me say just a couple things. We're doing a cool sale. If you want to support me, if you want to support the podcast, please consider taking advantage of this. We're doing a sort of, it's our 4th anniversary of Strong On, which is our sort of kettlebell programming membership thing. It's cool. It's really cool. And it's 4th anniversary. So we've been going for 4 years. We've done a ton of workouts. So I've actually collected a bundle package of some of my favorite the best of year 1 workouts and putting them on sale. There's like 2 packages you can get. One has about 50 workouts. The other has about 100 workouts, and very good rate, very good discount. You can get it at chroniclesofstrength.com/best-of-year-1. That's chroniclesofstrength.com/best-of-year-1. If you're into the fitness and kettlebell stuff, please take advantage of that. I think you're going to love the workouts. Short, hard-hitting, efficient. But let me say this, because I have other people who listen to the various podcasts, and they ask me very kindly. They say, "Hey, do you have a Patreon or something I'd like to contribute?" And I always say, "Thank you. That's super great." I don't. My business is really the fitness stuff. So if you want to support me, just buy one of the fitness programs, and I would hope you would use it yourself. Give it a shot. If you're not into it yet, I think you might enjoy it, or you could gift it to somebody else. So that's what keeps the light on. I have one light here at the Pat Flynn Show. So if you want to just add some support that way, I would super appreciate it. Finally, we are streaming on both channels now. We do have the new Philosophy for the People channel. So I'm going to start breaking the channels off. YouTube hates when you mix content. And I hate that, because I like being a generalist. I like talking about lots of different things, but YouTube has been killing me in terms of the algorithm of having just a mix of content. So the primary Pat Flynn channel is going to kind of slowly move just towards the fitness content. And then the new channel, Philosophy for the People, I don't have the link handy. Maybe somebody could link that in the comments. I would really appreciate it. If you could link that, subscribe to that channel, because that's where over time all the sort of philosophy content will be. So we've got the Pat Flynn Kettlebell channel and the Philosophy for the People channel. There'll be a mix for some time as we continue to build the audience over there, but over time we're going to start just kind of separating the channels out. So is that all the announcements? What else do we have coming up? What else have I been doing? Just had a great workout with the kids today. We were doing some jujitsu out front, doing some sprints, doing some push-ups. Beautiful weather here in Wisconsin. How are all of you? Give me a life update, friends. You're sending me a lot of questions. We're going to get to those, as many as I can here. But I'd love to hear about you. Even if it's just what you're drinking. I'm drinking yellow tea. All right. Lots of good questions here. I see stuff on Phaser's Augustinian proof, Plotinus, math, propositions. Cool. All right. You guys are going to give me a run for my money today. Free will, kettlebells. It's going to be a fun one. I did have some other stuff from Instagram and that you guys posted when I asked for topics. Maybe I'll come back to that because I want to get to the live stream stuff first. So let's just dive in, shall we? Please submit whatever you have. I'm going to bounce around. We're going to have some fun. Please also like and share and comment on this. That stuff really helps. Comment for the algorithm. Makes a big difference. Let us begin. Enrique says, Pat, simple question. What's your email address? Thank you and have a nice day. Sure, man. My the email is the best way to get in touch with me. Much better than social media or any place like this. My email address is my name at my website. So it's Pat Flynn at chroniclesofstrength.com. Pat Flynn at chroniclesofstrength.com. Of course, I welcome any emails. I try to get back in a timely manner. Life has been pretty hectic so far, but I'm pretty good at answering emails. If I don't get back to you within a couple of days, just ping me again. It's never a nuisance. It just means something got buried. So yeah, that's my email, and I look forward to hearing from you. All right. Next question from Y. Rivera says, Pat, I'm interested in your Fast 15 protocol. I'm wondering what equipment and kettlebell techniques I would need to know to do it. Are there any body weight exercise in it too? Many thanks. Yeah, cool, man. So Fast 15, I think you can still get it at chroniclesofstrength.com/fast15. I think that's the link. Is a very simple, effective protocol. People have gotten some really good results for it. It's a 15-day protocol, and it's 15 hours of fasting and 15-minute kettlebell workouts. It's very minimalist, so you just need one kettlebell. That's it. There are options to do some kettlebell exercises, but just one kettlebell, I'd say for men, anywhere between a 16 to 24 kilogram. You're going to be able to, that's going to cover it. And sorry, what was the other part of the question? Yeah, so that's in terms of equipment, technique, the basics. So if you know your swing, your squat, your snatch, your press, your Turkish get up, those 5, and your clean, those 6, you're going to be good to go. And the body weight supplements are all really basic, just like planks and push-ups and stuff like that. So it's very minimalist, very simple, very effective. So not many barriers to entry there. So I hope that answers your question. It was a good one. Follow up. Rivera says, also, thanks for all your great online content. I enjoy watching your videos on YouTube and interviews with Dan John, from whom I first heard about your Fast 15 in his video about fat loss. Yeah, Dan's been a great advocate of mine. I always appreciate Dan's support on many, many levels. So thank you. All right. Catholic Base says, does idealism lead to theism? This, yeah, no, I think it does. And most idealists think it does. You don't find many idealists who aren't theists. It's kind of a rare thing. From a Thomistic perspective, if you go idealist, you're still going to have enough on the scene to reconstruct the most of, if not all of, Thomas's primary ways to God, right? So you're still going to have change. You're still going to have the essence, existence distinction, even if it's just with intentional being that don't have any mind-independent reference, right? So you're going to have all you need there to launch into the existential proof. And in fact, the path might even be shorter because you can just kind of move right from contingent mind to necessary mind. So yeah, no, I think idealism does lead to theism, and it might even be a shorter path than it is for the metaphysical realist. One of the other questions that I got, it was posted on my wall. Sam Gutierrez says, I'd like to see you try and talk about Thomism and idealism and see if they are compatible. So yeah, this deserves a full episode. I would like to do a full episode. I'm very strongly in line with John Haldane on this. This is something that Haldane explores, and he actually sets up an argument in his debate book with Jack Smart, where he says, whether you take realism or whether you take idealism, you will get to theism. So his argument is like, if realism, then theism; if anti-realism, then theism. And he shows you how both paths will lead to theism. And he actually critiques Berkeley or Berkeley's primary arguments for idealism, and he says these don't really go through. But at the end of the day, he says, look, this doesn't mean that the Thomistic system isn't idealist in a sense, right? Because the space of reasons is always going to outstrip the space of causes. And the position he comes down at the end of the day is that, God is an unrestricted act of mentation. He's following sort of Lonergan here. God is an unrestricted act of understanding himself. and that to be is ultimately to be known by God. And many people might think that this is a sort of idealism. And in fact, many people have charged Lonergan with being a sort of idealist. And if you consider that a form of idealism, which you might, then I'm sort of in that camp. I'm sort of in that position. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the sort of idealism where the world is being created by my mind. There's still, reality that's pushing back on me, right? Doesn't mean that I don't participate and I don't help structure reality in certain ways, but that all reality is, in a sense, mind dependent on the divine intellect. I think that's absolutely right. So to be is to be known by God. And it's not that God's sort of scanning reality. It's that God has executive knowledge, right? He knows you in the way that an author knows his plot, right? By making it to be the case, by knowing it to be the case. So that's a brief sketch of how I would think about that. But I'm still committed to, and I think there's good reason to be committed to, the broad Thomistic system of not being an occasionalist and stuff like that, right? There really are secondary causes in the world. So it's not as cut and dry as I think some people make it seem. Is kind of what I'm saying. So depending on how you think of idealism will, I think, greatly affect how you answer this type of question. But that's a general sketch. Anthony says, Pat, what do you know about Poland? Not much, my friend. But I'd like to go there. What I read and what I see a lot about the culture is attractive to me. What should I know about Poland? And should I go? And should I come pay a visit? Do you want to host a kettle? Hey, if you want to host a workshop or something in Poland, I'm all ears, dude. That could be a lot of fun. Leftera says, Pat, if you could recommend one philosophy book and one theology book, what would you recommend? Let me try and be consistent here. What do I have? Well, I've recommended this philosophy book. Leftera, give me some more info. Where are you coming from? Have you been in the game a while? Are you a professional philosopher? Are you a studious amateur? Are you just getting started? I recognize your username. I think you're pretty well versed, if I remember right. But as a general recommendation, I've recommended this before. I'll do it again. It's lying right here still from the last time I recommended it. Mortimer Adler's 10 Philosophical Mistakes. This is a great book because it's going to give you sort of an overview, broad overview of the history of like some really important philosophical ideas. And he's going to try and diagnose where things went wrong with a lot of modern philosophy. And boy, does he go hard on Locke. So if you're like a huge Lockean, you're probably not going to like a lot of this book, but I think he's right. And he's showing the consequences of some of these modern philosophical ideas, mistakes that people make, that thinkers have made with respect to consciousness and substances and free will and all this. And he's showing in a sort of broad sense how we can resolve these mistakes by going back to perennial philosophy, to thinkers like Aristotle, to thinkers like Aquinas. So you're going to get a great sort of overview of the great philosophical ideas, great, but maybe also wrong, and see how ideas have consequences. So it's kind of a cool condensed history of philosophical ideas. But then he's also going to dive deeper into these ideas and I think give you the generally right way to start thinking about them, thinking about consciousness and its objects and human freedom and all that sort of thing, right? And morality. So it's a great book. And then he's got another book that's strongly in line with this called 6 Great Ideas. So I would also recommend that. So that you get 2 for the price of 1 there. As far as a theology book, I think a good kind of beginner theology book would be Frank Sheed's Theology and Sanity. That is an awesome, awesome introductory Catholic theology book. If you want 2 for the price of 1, then I would recommend The Light of Christ by Father Thomas Joseph White. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about that book, but I thought that was just a beautifully written, wonderful, wonderful sort of intro beginner theology book. So yeah, I gave you 4 books there, 10 Philosophical Mistakes, 6 Great Ideas on the philosophy side, and then Sheed's Theology and Sanity, and then Father Thomas Joseph White's The Light of Christ on the theology side. Of course, I'd love to hear everybody else's recommendations as well. Catholic says, I've been reading Mortimer Adler's book on how to think about God, and I wanted to know your thoughts on his critique of St. Thomas. Yeah, really interesting. So just to give you guys a little background, when I was sort of, moving along in my philosophical journey towards theism, Adler's book, How to Think About God, was one of the first books I read concerning philosophical arguments for God's existence. It was very influential to me. And in that book, he does make a case for what he thinks is a successful contingency argument. And it sort of rides on a formulation of the principle of sufficient reason, right? That we really do need to explain why any contingent thing is and why it's this way rather than some other way. And I think that's good as far as it goes. I think that still holds up quite well. Maybe I wouldn't formulate it exactly the way he does, but no major gripes there. But he does sort of go to task on St. Thomas, and he thinks, and he actually presses an objection. It's one that Catholic, I would just encourage you to listen to some of my previous episodes on this, because I've said a lot about it. An objection called existential inertia. So he takes this idea that we know from physics of inertia, and he sort of takes a physical theory and makes a metaphysical theory out of it, and proposes that things could have this attribute of existential inertia. And here I think Adler is just flat wrong. I think he just does not understand the deeper Thomistic metaphysics that leaves no room for anything like existential inertia. It would have to be an attribute that a substance has, but attributes depend on their substance, right? So it would have to involve a sort of vicious circularity where the substance only exists because of the attribute, but the attribute can't exist unless the substance is there, right? So it's sort of like this severe bootstrapping problem that you have once you understand things like the deeper metaphysical composition and the distinction between essence and existence. It just rules out any possibility of existential inertia on Thomas's metaphysical system, right? And I think Adler just missed that. I think he just misunderstood it. And it's somewhat easy to miss that if you only sort of look at, maybe the 5 ways or just some Thomistic arguments, but you don't really try to understand the deeper metaphysics. You have to, this is a big thing that I try to push when it comes to St. Thomas. If you want to understand Aquinas's way to God, and so I'm writing this book with Gavin right now. It's going to be called Aquinas's Little Known Way to God. And we're going to be presenting his De Ente argument, which we take to be his argument, the argument for God, and saying you have to understand the metaphysics behind this. And then you once you understand those metaphysics, you use that understanding to interpret each of the 5 ways. So De Ente sort of becomes an interpretive lens for each of the 5 ways. And you need to understand the deeper metaphysics to really make sense and unify the 5 ways. And once you read them like that properly, you're going to see that Adler's critiques just don't fly. So I like Adler's book. I was impressed by it at first. Still impressed by it. It's a good book. But as I got deeper into Thomism, I came I came to the conclusion that Adler was just wrong. He was just wrong on this. And in fact, just a bit of, I guess, something that's historically interesting. This was actually a pretty big point of contention between him and Jacques Maritain. Maritain came down quite hard on Adler because Adler had an article published in one of the Catholic journals. I forget which one it was, where he kind of pushed this objection, and Maritain was harshly critical of Adler. And he specifically criticizes Adler in his book, Approaches to God. So if you want kind of to see the critiques that Adler got in that time period among his contemporaries, I would check out Approaches to God by Jacques Maritain. And it's just one of those funny things to see that like nothing new these days is like really new, right? The debates we're kind of having now in philosophy of religion, they've been around. Like we've dealt with this already. That's why I was like kind of really surprised when these existential inertia objections came up again, because I'm like, I read about this like years and years ago, and like suddenly it's a thing again. Interesting, weird. Anyway, it's a good question. Callum says, "Woo! Cheers, my friend. How are all you guys doing?" All right, let's keep moving on. Brandon says, Pat, what is the best argument for consciousness given naturalism? I'm not sure I understand that question. You'll have to clarify that for me, Brendan, like what is the best argument for consciousness given naturalism? Like how do naturalists best explain consciousness? I mean, there's a variety of options that they out there for how naturalists try to either explain consciousness or explain it away. It seems like for naturalists that want to hold on to consciousness right now, there's a convergence towards panpsychism that or theories of sort of proto-consciousness or fading qualia and stuff like that. At the end of the day, I think that's all nonsense, but that's how some naturalists who don't want to be eliminativists or just hardcore epiphenomenalists or something like that try to preserve consciousness. The idea of proto-consciousness or fading qualia, that especially strikes me as nonsense, right? I mean, consciousness is something, representation is something that's like, it's either there or it's not, right? So you might be able to represent less. That's conceivable, but that's never any less of a representation. So it just seems like talk of fading or proto-consciousness is just deeply conceptually confused, and just a complete non-starter for me. And then panpsychism is interesting. You know, there's different theories of panpsychism. And to the extent that like people want to say that consciousness is somehow kind of like at the ground layer of reality, you know, part of me just wants to say, hey, welcome to the club, guys. Theists have kind of been saying something like this all along. But then you're going to have problems of construction and unification as panpsychists. I think that theism is the obvious go-to option here, because obviously theism has the resources to explain conscious beings. Physicalism doesn't. I really don't think naturalism does at all. And a lot of these proposals just seem sort of desperate and ad hoc to me within a naturalistic framework. I'm not even sure if that's your question, but if you want to clarify it, I'll be happy to build on it. Muhammad says, Pat, what do you think about the free will problem? Muhammad, yeah, the free will problem is something like this, right? Free will can't exist because if something isn't determined, it's random, and if something's determined, then it isn't free, and if it's random, then it's not free will, right? And yeah, this has always struck me as a terrible argument, right? And I don't know why people are super impressed by this. Basic logic will tell you that, yeah, if something that something being determined and something being random, those are contraries. Those are logical contraries, but they're not contradictories, right? So they don't exhaust the space of possibilities. And the question is there some kind of third category here? And the answer is yes, there is, right? Proponents of free will and libertarian agency say there's the category of rational willing, right? And the interesting thing about the free will problem is it doesn't even like seem to be afforded any type of support even by contemporary physics, because even in our best physical theory now, we have sort of indeterministic probabilities. So we have example of something that isn't completely determined, but not just totally random either, right? Now, I think it's a mistake to just kind of like try and park or make sense of free will and contemporary physical theory, but it's just showing that there's this other category of possibility here, and that rational willing of sort of indeterministic but reason-based action is that third category. So that's the general way to approach the free will problem. I think it's a pseudo problem, and I don't know why people are so impressed by it. John, I'll go back to John Haldane again. I think he has some really great stuff to say about that. David Falp says, super pumped to be attending your Strong on Cert in November. David, we will see you there, my friend. I'm pumped to be having you. And we're going to be covering a lot of good stuff. For those who are interested, you know, we usually do a Strong on Cert once or twice a year. We typically do it in person, but with the, you know, the whole crap going on in the world, we're doing it online this time, and we're going to be starting early December, and it's going to be online. It's going to be awesome. We're going to talk kettlebell technique. We're going to teach kettlebell technique, how to coach kettlebell technique. We're going to teach how to program, exercise programming from a generalist and minimalist perspective. We're going to teach nutrition, and we're going to teach business and marketing, something that no other cert really does, or at least doesn't do well. So, David, I'm really pumped that you're joining us, and I hope other people join us as well. If you're interested in checking that out, the link is chroniclesofstrength.com/strongoncertification. It's not cheap, but it's a worthy investment, and we've got payment plans if you need it. So cheers to you guys. Callum says, what do you think of Phaser's Augustinian proof? I saw Proust and Rasmussen address it in their book, but nowhere else. It's one of my favorites. Yeah, I'm a fan, man. It's been a while since I looked at. It's also kind of a variation on what's known as the argument from eternal truths. And in that proof, he develops scholastic realism. So he's wrestling with the problem of universals. And what the argument at the end of the day is going to show is that we need an eternal mind to make sense of eternal truths, certain necessary truths, propositions, universals, abstract objects, and stuff like that. I'm trying to think of other iterations that are pretty cool. If you like that argument, Callum, check out Bill Valachella's article From Facts to God. If you dig Phaser's Augustinian proof, check out Valachella's argument. I think it was, I forget what journal it was published in, but you can find it, From Facts to God. It's very cool because it takes a similar path, but then he kind of uses it for a modal ontological argument. It's really neat what he does. I would love to get Bill on to discuss it on this channel. Bill's a really smart philosopher. He was influential to me in a number of ways. And I bugged him a couple times to come on. We haven't got him yet, so maybe we'll get a chance to get him on. But yeah, I'm a fan. And Rasmussen, Josh, good friend of mine. In fact, he'll be coming on the channel again not too long from now. We're going to talk about some of the new work he's done on consciousness. He's got a new book coming out on that. He's done some cool kind of similar moves. He's got a chapter in a book of his, How Reason Leads to God. What chapter is it? I forget what chapter it is off the top of my head, but he kind of takes a similar pathway and shows from, these sort of eternal or necessary truths we can reach back to. We're going to need some eternal necessary mind to ultimately ground and make sense of these. So I think it's an underappreciated pathway to theism, to be sure. Hard to it's not like very like apologetically or conversationally convenient because it's so abstract, right? And there's kind of so much that goes into it. But I think Phaser's presentation is one of the best introductions to that. Dave says he's sort of a budding trainer helping a few people out for free in my garage. Yeah, Dave, man, that's how you start, dude. So, just for me, I mean, people are sometimes curious, like how I got in, like how so much of my business is based in fitness. When I was going to college, I was competing in Taekwondo and I discovered kettlebells from my coach, Sam, and I fell in love with them as a sort of general strength and conditioning tool. And just to pay bills in college, I just started getting my certifications and training people. So, I paid my dues, man. I did my 10,000 hours and then some, just training individuals. I taught so many classes. I taught classes at my college, at the YMCA, at other gyms, boot camps. I was up at like 4:30 in the morning teaching, running, going to classes, doing my schoolwork, and then teaching like 8:30 at night. I would have classes. I was burning the candle at both ends, but you know what? You can't beat that. You spend time in textbooks, you learn programming and physiology and all the theory, but just the hands-on experience, you can't beat it, Dave. So the fact that you're working with people, real life, solving problems in real time, that is invaluable, my friend. So keep doing that. That is never wasted time. So yeah, definitely. Brendan says, is the Augustinian proof about parts and wholes? No, that would be the Neoplatonic proof. It's going to argue from all composites requiring a cause to an absolutely simple source, an eternal unifier that is itself non-composite, if you will. So yeah, good stuff. Lots of good stuff. Dave is in the operating room. I hope everything's going well, Dave. I'll say a prayer for you. Hope it's nothing serious there. Dee says, I'm heading for football. That's soccer to me. Cool. Thanks for tuning in. To comment on the other guy's question, says Catholic, I don't know if it's a free will problem, but I'd like to know your view on the preservation of God's sovereignty and free will. Yeah, I mean, this is all parked into what I hold as an external model of divine simplicity and divine agency. And I think the best book on that and an interview you should watch is my conversation with W. Matthews Grant. He's got a book called Free Will and God's Universal Causality. And the whole project of that book is to show that we can preserve universal causality divine simplicity, and a robust account of libertarian free will. I am like fully on board with Matthew Grant's account. It's Thomistic, and there's an upshot where he will show you how divine simplicity actually helps break the conditions for determinism. A commitment to divine simplicity actually helps to make sense of libertarian free will. So sometimes people think that these are incompatible. Matthews brilliantly flips that on its head and shows that the effects can differ without any intrinsic change in the cause, which is going to help break the conditions of determinism, which require a cause that is both prior to and logically sufficient for. And divine simplicity is going to wipe that away, and it's going to leave all the room we need for free will. So I developed this also a bit in Catholic. If you look towards the end of my I've got a Thomistic argument for the existence of God on my YouTube channel. Head towards the end of that presentation, because I specifically bring this objection up. And it's an objection from contingent knowledge. It's a way of formulating the objection of contingent knowledge against God's simplicity or sovereignty. And I spend more time developing my model of how that objection can be overcome and how divine simplicity actually helps to secure libertarian freedom. So it's a technical, complicated thing, but that I'll just kind of point you in those directions, because I've said a lot about that. I also have a number of posts on Chronicles of Strength, my primary website on this. I think one of the posts is God's knowledge of sin, divine simplicity and God's knowledge of sin. If anybody has that one handy, you might want to link it there, because I go into some detail on that. So these are some of the trickier ones, but there's good solutions out there. So I'll just point you in that direction. Brendan says, drinking black coffee, got a little baby girl who's learning to stand, and I'm stuck at work doing accounting. That's the whole horizon. Cheers to you, man, and God bless you. I'm a father of 3 girls, 1 son. Man, God, do I love my kids, man. They're just the greatest joy. They're just the greatest joy in the world. They really are. Callum says, well, Pat, I'm glad you asked. I'm weighing up down jackets compared to waterproofs for the winter. Any thoughts? I'm in London. I've been out of my pay grade, man. I know nothing about that. How's London these days, Callum? I'm not a very cultured man. I'm actually not. I've never been to Europe. I would like to get there. It seems like there's a lot of insanity going on. But there's a lot of places I'd love to go. I was going to go to a conference in Ireland last year. Gavin invited me out to this philosophical conference, but obviously that got canceled. So that would have been my first time getting over across the pond, as we like to say. And we were going to link that to a trip to Italy. So I was kind of sad, because all of that just, with the whole situation, I don't want to say any words that will get me punished by the sensorial overlords. So I'd love to get over there at some point. See Big Ben. My kids were asking about Big Ben. My son recently was like, is there a giant clock tower somewhere, Dad? He must have saw it on a cartoon. I'm like, I think you're thinking of Big Ben, son. We'll go see it sometime. Sorry, I scrolled down too much. To Callum and Pat, have you checked out Rasmussen's book, Bridge of Reason? That seems to touch on a ton of this, including the proof you're mentioning. I actually was early reviewer of that book. Josh sent me that before he published it. And it's a great introductory book, and that came out before his book, How Reason Leads to God. I think it's still available on Amazon. Josh is a brilliant man. I love Josh. He was influential to me, and I always love chatting with him. So if you want just somebody who's just a cutting edge thinker when it comes to, issues concerning analytic metaphysics, Josh he's just such a bright guy. I can't recommend him enough. Whenever I'm struggling with something, Josh is one of the guys that I'll send an email to, and just thinking together with him is always really productive. So I can't recommend his stuff enough. Brendan says, Poland is awesome by the sounds of it. Anthony says, I don't have much options to host a kettlebell workshop, but I would happily help to plan a tour if you decide to travel to Poland in the future. If you have any other people here from Poland and you want to set something up, we'll do it. We'll do it. You just you gotta find a place to host, and you gotta pay the fee. Fee's not cheap, but I hear the services are worth it. Dave says, you, Dan John, the Hebrew Hammer, Chip Conrad, and Jim Wenner have really shaped my training philosophy. Thank you. Cheers, Dave. Happy to hear that, man. We try to play it straight around here. Look, fitness isn't rocket science, says the neuroscientist. Basic principles, understand the basic principles, apply them consistently, practice the fundamentals. You're going to do well. Eat protein, go for walks, lift weights, get to bed in time, limit social media. Don't watch The Walking Dead at 11 p.m. before bed. Practice a martial art, have ways of alleviating stress, eat more vegetables, eliminate hyperpalatable foods, fast occasionally. It's kind of it. I wish I had more like magic secrets to sell, man, but I just don't. It's just a matter of just getting the principles down and then, kind of getting creative with ways of helping people to apply them and building virtue. I think that's another big thing that's often overlooked in the fitness space these days is how can we think about these principles of opportunities for building virtue, especially things like fasting and exercise. So if you're into the cardinal virtues, I think it's sometimes cool to think of like fasting, temperance, exercise, fortitude, right? We can see like two specific opportunities, if you will, to increase in virtue, to sort of align, get the passions restrained, develop self-mastery. That's how Plato talks about temperance, self-mastery. And then, fortitude is, we know something good is kind of tough. So we got to get, we got to develop some grit to push through and get it done. All right, let's keep rocking and rolling. Catholic says, have you read Antony Flou's book on the existence of God? I did find his critique of compatibilism plausible. What's your thoughts on it? So Antony Flou was a very famous, very formidable atheistic thinker for many years. And he actually changed his mind. So he's one of those significant figures who was very prominent, very influential philosopher. He was a very staunch atheist for many years. He has a number of papers out that argue against theism and God. And towards the end of his career, towards the end of his life, he changed his mind. And there's actually a book that he has. It's called Why There Is a God. So it's just one of those really cool stories and things to see of like a guy who was, obviously intellectually just extremely sharp, who just, when he came into new considerations, and I think if I remember right, he attributed kind of coming into the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition, those types of arguments for God, which is what convinced me. So he said those, and surprisingly enough, it seems like he was also impressed by some of the arguments from intelligent design, which is really funny because, people often scoff at those or call it pseudoscience, but you seem to have an example of one of the brightest atheists actually being moved by some of that. So sort of like traditional metaphysical arguments that, I don't know, maybe he was just never really exposed to in the sort of modern analytic tradition. And then sort of the intelligent design proponents took one of the world's most formidable atheists and turned him into a theist. I don't remember if he ever became a Christian or not, but that was just, that's just a really cool thing, right? I think it shows that this was a man who was just, really intellectually honest. And when he got to a point where it seemed like, okay, this is where the evidence leads, I'm going with it, come hell or high water. And he paid a price for that. I mean, if you remember when that happened, you go back and look at it, like people really attacked this guy quite like viciously. And it was really kind of a weird thing. Started calling him like senile and desperate and like he's afraid that he was going to die. And he's like, you guys are crazy. I'm totally with it. So it was just a really interesting, unfortunate thing. I don't remember his critiques of compatibilism though, so I can't really speak on that. But I'm not a compatibilist. I'm a libertarian. So if he's critiquing compatibilism, I'm all for it, right? Catholic says, I always had hope that Oppie would be the first modern day Flou in a conversion of atheism to theism. Hey man, Oppie's a really smart guy. And Maybe who knows? I just read a really good exchange book, sort of debate book between Kenny Pierce and Graham Oppy, and I thought it was great. It's called "Is There a God?" And Oppy kind of just gives his account of naturalism and why he's a naturalist, and Pierce gives his account of theism and why he's a theist, and I highly recommend it. Obviously, you see where I land. I don't think that Oppy's account provides anything close to a satisfactory explanation. But he's a good thinker. I enjoy reading him. I just don't think it works. But he strikes me as somebody who is sincere. So he's a guy that, like, it would not surprise me if eventually, maybe he did change his mind on some of this stuff. Oppy's like argument, is that he just thinks that, and I have a few articles recently out sort of addressing this, is that, if two theories explain just as much, believe the simpler. And then, I think Oppy would want to say, and in fact, he does say that, theism and atheism can explain, or naturalism can explain just as much as theism, and naturalism is simpler. So let's go with naturalism. And yeah, I'm just going to challenge that naturalism is either simpler or can explain nearly as much as theism. To my mind, naturalism can only explain as much as theism if it wires in vast amounts of complexity. If it becomes vastly more complex and ad hoc and contrived and has far more ways it can go wrong, then maybe it can explain as much as theism. So I'm just gonna go ham on that assumption. I just think it's completely wrong. And I have a couple things out recently to talk about that. I have two articles on Catholic Answers. The first one specifically argues that theism is simpler than atheism, and I've sort of got somebody who would make that appeal to simplicity in mind there. And then I was on the Classical Theism podcast with John DeRosa, and we talked about this pretty significantly as well. So I would check out those resources if you're interested in that. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I've just got good things to say about Graham, and to me, it's all about trying to advance the conversation and do good philosophy. And this is an interesting thing, I think, that you find between sort of the professionals and like the internet. When you have professional philosophers who have worldview disagreements, there's just like, it's just so much better, right? We talk to each other like adults. We talk to each other with respect. Graham never says, as far as I'm aware, that I've seen, that he thinks that like being a theist is unreasonable or anything like that, right? He's like, in no sense like one of these petulant new atheists who just spew a bunch of nonsense and frankly bigotry and stuff like that. Because no intelligent person should say anything like that. Who knows what they're talking about? But on the internet, you just have this sort of nasty vitriol, this sort of tribalism. So I'm trying to do my part in transcending that, trying to advance the conversation as best I can. You guys can be the judge of whether I'm doing a decent job of that or not. Hey, Pat says, is Aristotelian potency as broad a category as logical possibility, or is it more restricted form of possibility? Yeah, this is a good question, right? I'm going to go with it's going to kind of how you think about modality, right? And modalism and stuff like that. I am pretty convinced by David Oderberg's account, right, of a real essentialism. But that's going to depend, like how you're thinking about this is going to depend on a number of things, right? So potencies are grounded in actualities, right? And potencies, the potencies a thing have are restricted by its nature, right? So for example, I don't have a potency to, what don't I have a potency for? I don't have a potency to just like, flap my wings and fly 30,000 feet in the air. I just don't have that naturally, right? So somebody might think that that's like broadly logically possible, but an Aristotelian would say no. Like given the nature of humanity, that's not actually a possibility. Like we would have to have a different nature to have that. Now it's possible in the sense like that God could create some being, because it doesn't seem like there's anything contradictory about a being that could flap its appendages and fly 30,000 feet in the air, right? So it kind of depends how you think about it, right? Are you thinking about just like individual natures? Then the Aristotelian is going to restrict the scope of possibility given the sort of within the confines of a particular nature or substance, right? Just like not anything that just seems just because it's not contradictory, the Aristotelians say, doesn't mean that it's possible, because the possibilities for any nature are going to be restricted by its nature, by its essence, right? However, given that God is omnipotent, and omnipotence for God really just means that he can bring about all possibilities of being, then it's a little bit more expansive, if that makes sense. So yeah, I just think a lot of the modern ways and possible world semantics. Some Thomists are really hard on possible worlds. I'm not that hard. I think as long as we just realize that it's a tool, and it's a restricted tool, and it's a good tool, as long as we understand that it's restricted. I think it's good. I think we should keep it. But I think we should also remind ourselves of the critiques that Odeberg raises in the first chapter of Real Essentialism. So hopefully that gives you some idea of kind of where I'm coming from on this. All right, let's just a few more minutes here, guys. I'm going to have to sort of wrap this one up. Let's see here, skimming through. Muhammad says, have you heard of Rob Kuhn's Thomistic dual agency theory about free will? I have. Yeah, I'm a fan. I think that's pretty consistent with Matthew Grant's dual sources account. So if you like Kuhn's work on this, I would definitely check out Matthews Grant's book, Free Will and Divine Universal Causality. Yeah, my understanding is Rob Kuhn's just had 2 chapters out in a book on providence and objective chance and randomness. I haven't read them yet, but I would check it out. Really good questions today, guys. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm just kind of skimming along. Lots of good questions. I went out of order now. Here we go. Jason says, hey, Pat, I remember you mentioned an easy mile for one of your fitness standards. Would you do the running to accomplish this outside of weight training or train in other ways? Yeah, I think just doing some easy running after weight training is fine. You could do it on separate days. But if you're doing just efficient weight training, I think you... So, for example, today I did mostly body weight strength training. I had the ab wheel out, which I love. And it was really fun. It was a really fun session today. So I did different body weight exercises, ab wheel. Then I wrestled with my kids in the yard. I've got 2 of my kids doing jiu-jitsu right now. So I put them in a bunch of arm bars and chokes and stuff like that. And then we did some just some interval running and sprints at the end. So since the standard, I think, is very reasonable, I think if you're training for, resistance training for 30 to 40 minutes, doing an extra 15, 20 minutes of just running or cardio afterwards is totally doable. But you could separate it out. You could just do a separate day. And I would recommend, Jason, if you want to increase your capacity to mix it up, right? Just have one day where you just kind of go for an extended run at a very moderate intensity, and then have another day. I think you could get far with just 2 days a week, right? So have one day where you just go distance, moderate intensity, steady, that sort of thing, and then have another day where you do sort of interval running. So interval running is a great training technique. So you do a sprint, you walk for a bit of time, you jog for a bit of time. You sprint, you walk for a bit of time, you jog for a bit of time. You just rotate that for 15 to 20 minutes. Sprint, walk 1 to 2 minutes, jog 1 to 2 minutes. Sprint, walk 1 to 2 minutes, jog 1 to 2 minutes. If you just did that twice a week, I think you're going to hit the standard of an easy, quick mile pretty quickly, as long as the other components like nutrition and resistance training are in place. Catholic says, according to Bill Craig, moral arguments to God are most effective. Thoughts? I guess it depends what you mean by most effective. Like, do I find them the most philosophically convincing, or do they tend to be like the most persuasive to people? These are 2 different things. I mean, I think the arguments that are most philosophically convincing are often not the most persuasive because they're just really technical, hard to understand. So they're hard to sort of get across in an everyday conversation or a podcast or things like that. Like Aquinas' De Ente, or we were talking about the argument from eternal truths. Like this, that's not the sort of thing that you just have like a normal like conversation on the bus about, right? That's tough. Whereas moral arguments tend to be easier to, I guess, kind of like get off. Right. I forget Craig's formulation. Isn't his is like if God doesn't exist, then objective moral values and duties don't exist, but they do exist, therefore God exists, right? Do I find that the best argument? Probably not. Not because I think it's like wrong in the general sense. I just think it's just a little too quick the way I think about morality. So I'm an essentialist. And I think human morality is constrained by human nature, right? That we have a particular essence and that the natural law sets dictates for us. And that if we want to flourish, that we need to follow the dictates of the natural law, right? So I actually want to grant like the naturalists a little bit of room here and say that they could do a lot of moral work if they're like a sort of Aristotelian naturalist. Now, I think we should note that there's very few Aristotelian naturalists. I mean, I don't even know. I can think of some naturalistic Platonists. I can't really think of many Aristotelian naturalists, but it's possible. I think the reason there's so few Aristotelian naturalists is because as soon as you veer towards Aristotelianism, it just so naturally lends itself towards theism. And that's what I want to say at the end of the day, is that to support that entire system, to make sense of essences and teleology, you're going to need an ordering mind that imparts existence to those essences and directs them toward their end. That's where God comes in. And God can also serve as the sort of the highest standard, the highest objective standard that the essences are really just sort of finite participations in. God as a subsistent good can be the sort of the anchor of our concepts of perfect justice, home, mercy, forgiveness, love, and so on and so forth, right? So that's how I think about it. If I'm right, I think Craig is sort of just a divine command theorist, divine command ethicist. I'm not that, right? I'm a traditional Aristotelian Thomist on these things. Now there's good defenses of divine command ethics out there, but ultimately we part ways. So yeah, Catholic. I would say that. I would say at the end of the day, yeah, I think to make sense of morality, you need theism. Or if you want to be modest, we could say theism gives the best explanation of morality. If you don't, maybe it's good to be more modest in some conversations. I think theism can give the only ultimate explanation, if you want my honest take, but we could be more modest and say theism is a better explanation. And the reason I think it might be more persuasive to people is just because we're such moral creatures, right? I mean, we're just constantly making moral judgments, and we have deep moral intuitions that some things are really right, some things are really wrong. And so we sort of rebel against the idea, as we should, that this can just be resigned as a sort of delusion that was fobbed off by the evolutionary process. So people are going to look for some way to anchor that and make sense of that. And I think it's just very natural for people to think of theism as a good anchor point, right? Because we're valued because an eternal mind chose us based on reasons. So we're eternally valued, right? That's a nice thing, because then our value doesn't depend on how other people feel about us or how other people treat us. Our value doesn't depend on even how we feel about ourselves, which is great, right? Just because I feel crappy about myself doesn't mean I'm worth any less, given a theistic conception. And then duties and obligations too, right? I mean, that's another sort of aspect of moral experience we need to explain. And that's where it seems like the sort of authoritative structure that theism gives helps a lot. But it's still, I think, kind of filtered through or should be seen through an essentialism rather than just sort of an arbitrary decree, if that makes sense. Good consideration. All right, let's see if we can squeeze in a few more here. Really good questions. Here's a good question. Mark says, I can't recall ever feeling an internal drive or need to worship God. Please, can you express the phenomenal content in your need to worship? Yeah, I mean, look, I'm teaching confirmation to a bunch of juniors in high school right now. And we started on the God question just last night. And, we were putting up kind of like listing reasons, hey, for and against. What are some reasons that people think God exists? What are some reasons people think God does not exist? And one of the reasons somebody said is a sort of lack of religious experience. And I strongly resonated with that, Mark. I resonate with you. Like growing up, I never had any profound religious experiences. I never had an impulse to go and worship in any sense. I think it's really important to understand the Catholic paradigm, and considering Catholicism really changed my mind on this, because the highest form of worship, of course, is the Mass, which is offering or representing the sacrifice of Christ to the Father. And so worship was traditionally in the Judeo-Christian was not about like rocking out to a Christian pop band or something like that, right? It's about sacrifice. And I think that there's some sort of important, and I think it's really important to understand from a theological standpoint, like God doesn't command us to worship him because God needs it. That's a silly caricature, right? Like God's perfect. He doesn't need our worship. Everything God commands of us, he commands it because it's good for us given our nature. Now, why would it be good to worship God for us? Well, because God is that in which we will have all of our ultimate desires fulfilled. Our longings for infinite goodness, home, justice, mercy, love, friendship, right? We have these infinite desires, and only the infinite source of that can appropriately correspond and fulfill that. Worship also helps us to break down our superficiality, our narcissism, our egoism, right? It helps us to give thanks, to be grateful for what we have, to offer things up. And I think once you kind of see it through that paradigm, and not through a sort of just, I guess, I don't know. I'm not going to say anything negative about other forms of Christianity here, but the Catholic paradigm made a lot more sense to me of worship as something that is objectively good for us to help us orient towards the ultimate end, to receive the graces we need, of course, obviously through the sacraments and the Holy Eucharist, but also to help us break down our superficiality, to help us increase in gratitude, to help us increase in love, and to help make sure, and this is important, right? So Aquinas, when he's considering religion in relation to the virtues, Aquinas puts religion under the category of justice. And justice, of course, is giving to others what they are owed. And we have obligations sort of on the horizontal plane to each other as human beings. But we also have obligations on the vertical plane, right? Of giving to God what God deserves. And of course, God has given us everything that we have, every good that we have, right? And is constantly directing us towards our ultimate end, our ultimate good, our ultimate happiness. That is something that should command our gratitude, that we should be focused on and oriented towards. And God is, certainly in the Catholic tradition, God has said, this is how I'm going to help get you there. This is how I'm going to help make you perfect. This is how I'm going to help make you morally perfect, how I'm going to help give you the graces so that you can be eternally happy. I think once we see it like that, it starts to make a lot of sense. And for me, it was about sense making, because like you, Mark, I never really had this. I'm just not a feelings person. I'm not, right? Like I've never had that. But there's good sense to be made of it. And once the intellect's there, so for me, I had sort of the intellectual conversion first, but then I had a deep moral conversion. And you need that moral conversion. That's a huge part of the conversion process, where I said, all right, I've got to go all in. I've got to give myself completely to this. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that's just how I would start to think about something like that. And I want to say I appreciate your comments. It's something I resonate with. I know I said a few more, but you guys have some great questions, and want to take a few more here. I hope this is helpful. Will you guys mind just liking and sharing? And once this stream is over, if you would leave like some more comments and questions afterwards, that helps a lot too. Lord and Forgive says, I always see those memes of philosophers who are sleep deprived from existentialist thoughts. Do you think it's a result of bad philosophy, or do you relate to that? I don't know, man. I've always been a bad sleeper. I've always been a restless kid. Probably all the cigarettes my mom smoked when I was in the womb and stuff like that, right? Yeah, I mean, look, it's not hard to imagine, and this is something I can relate with, right? As I was moving through different philosophical schools of thought, that like any number of them might fill you with enormous amounts of existential dread. I remember when I spent a lot of time with Nietzsche. Man, that dude bothered me in so many ways. His conclusions on so many things were so haunting, from the psychological egoism, all of it, right? All of it, to even his thoughts on eternal return. I'm like, man, this is a horrible picture of reality. And like, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. But I remember I was always deeply bothered by that stuff. And I think I've always been open about that. Even when I would have thought of myself as a pretty, committed atheist or naturalist or whatever, like I was never happy or comfortable with it. I think I've always been able to be honest enough with myself to say, like, look, just because I don't like something, it doesn't mean it's not true. So I couldn't abandon it just because I didn't like it. I abandoned it eventually because I thought that it was fundamentally absurd, that it wasn't true. But there's a long time that I sat in that worldview with a lot of, I guess, existential dread. And that can cause you to lose a lot of sleep. It can cause you to look at the world in a really grim way. The number of these people just kill themselves, right? And it's not like entirely crazy to see why they might do it, right? So if you think that like everything is just determined and that life is utterly meaningless and that there's nothing coming after, and that psychological egoism is true, and that there's really no like transcendent or real aspect of things like love, despite all impressions to the contrary. It's just an illusion that's fobbed off on us. Like that's a horrible view of reality. Who wants that to be true? If you want that to be true, you are sick in the head. Now, maybe you think it's true. Maybe you think it's unavoidable. But if you want that to be true, I don't know, man. I mean, it's time to get up to speed on your antidepressant meds or something. So it's not. I don't think it's hard to see why people would lose sleep over that, or decide that they just don't want to be involved in that anymore. And the thing I would say to anybody with that is like, look, man, there's way better options out there. These positions reduced to absurdity. They're not true. And check out St. Thomas, check out Plato, go back, read 10 philosophical mistakes, see how people like Nietzsche got to the absurd conclusions they did by just following through on bad ideas that came before them, right? But I think there's hope, right? So I was in that. I mean, for me, just I've told the story a million times. Like I kind of started out with the atheist existentialists. That was sort of my introduction to philosophy. That was the kind of world I swam in for a long time. And it was going deeper into that worldview that eventually brought me out of it, right? It just kept reducing to absurdity until I decided to consider other options. And I'm very glad that I did. I do not know how to pronounce your name, good sir. Dowie? Maybe? Has a question. What are some of your thoughts on regular in-session strength workouts for martial arts classes? When, what, and how much, assuming most of the students don't do anything outside of class? Yeah, 2 times a week. Basic strength training is a good place to start. This is what we did and still do with a lot of our Taekwondo and martial arts students at the Dragon Gym. Good supplementary, because what you want to do is, like, if you're really focused on your sport, you don't want what you're doing in the gym to take away from your sport, right? So if you're crushing yourself in the gym, constantly sore, constantly depleted, that's going to detract from your martial arts practice. So I think 2 days a week, you could do split or full body routines, and do a mix of just some good strength and power work and some good muscle building work. Fundamentals, push, pull, hinge, squat, carry. Do some good mobility work. You probably don't need to do much conditioning because you're going to be getting conditioning from your sport, right? So if you're doing Taekwondo, you're going to be getting well conditioned from Taekwondo. If you're doing jiu-jitsu, you're going to do getting well conditioned from jiu-jitsu. So I don't think you need to do a lot of conditioning. Just do the strength training. You could do 2 days a week. You could do one way I like to split it up is you could do pushing and hinging one day. So a couple pushing exercises, a couple hinging exercises. So, dips and military press paired with deadlifts and swings one day. And then the second day, you could do pulls and squats. So you could do pull-ups and rows paired with front squats and Bulgarian split squats. And then on both of those days, just add in some auxiliary exercises, some loaded carries, some Turkish get-ups, some ab wheel. And you're going to have a lot of bases covered. And that's going to lend some really good support to your martial arts training without depleting you, without burning you out. So that's what I would recommend to you, my good sir. Horseman says, hello, Pat. Good to see you, Horseman. As always, pleasure to have you here. Are you incorporating barbells to your kettlebell training at all, or do you keep it kettlebell only? What is the best way to combine both? Yeah, great question. I think you just think in terms of killer apps, right? There's a tool. This tool probably is really good at certain jobs. And if I have them available, I might as well use them for what they're best at. So for me, barbells, I'm still using for deadlifts and a lot of hinging patterns. So rack pulls and deadlifts are awesome with barbells. So those are a regular inclusion of mine. Occasionally bench press. Bench press these days, I'm mostly doing dumbbells. I find that just works better for me in a lot of instances, but it's still a great exercise. So I would say deadlift and bench press are a nice way to just kind of blend barbells into your kettlebell training. I think kettlebell front squats are really probably what most people need. I don't really back squat anymore. I don't have most of my clients back squatting anymore. I just don't think they need it. I think kettlebell front squats are going to give you all that you need. So yeah, I would say the hinging and the pushing with the barbell is a great complement to kettlebell training. It's typically where I focus. So because that's the thing with kettlebells is like you have the swings. So you're kind of on the other end of the force velocity spectrum with the explosive hinging movement, but it's hard to kind of like get the really heavy hinging with kettlebells because even like two really heavy kettlebells aren't that heavy for hinging. So that's where the barbell is a really good complement there. And then kettlebells are kind of limited on the horizontal pushing. So that's where the barbell can come in there too. I think, again, kettlebells are probably all you're going to need, most people, for the overhead pressing. Most even really strong dudes I know aren't pressing more than 2 beast kettlebells. So I don't even think you need the kettlebell there. Good questions, my friends. Good questions. Lord and Forgive says, what's a good intro to Thomistic epistemology? That's a really convenient question because I have it right here. Just sitting right here. This is called The Philosophy of Knowledge by Kenneth Gallagher. Check this one out. This is one of the books that was assigned in my master's program. And I just thought it was a great text. I thought it was a really, really good text on Thomistic epistemology. So I would recommend that. The Philosophy of Knowledge by Kenneth Gallagher. I will finally be having Dr. Therese Corey on the show, and we're going to talk about Thomistic theories of cognition and knowledge coming up in November. And she's doing some really cool work on that, so you might want to check out some of her work. Not hers is an introductory, but it's good. Another good one, Stump has a really good section, Eleanor Stump, in her book Aquinas, on Thomistic epistemology as well. So I would check that out. Callum says, what sports are you interested in, Pat? I think it was mentioned in a stream before that you only like watching wrestling. Yeah, like old school, like 80s and 90s professional wrestling. That's not a joke. I love watching that. And my wife does too. My sweet, sweet, beautiful Catholic wife, if you can imagine it, is like a big old school WWF, WCW wrestling fan. She'll watch that with me. And this is why I love my wife so much, right? We'll go to mass, pray the rosary, and then we'll watch like Diamond Dallas Page and Sting and Macho Man just go at it. I mean, I want to do an episode on like the philosophy of wrestling because it's like it's such an American thing, right? Like it's like a soap opera for men. It's so hilariously unintelligent, yet it's like really impressive at the same time. Like the coordination, the athleticism, the absolute brutality. Like, yeah, like wrestling's like fake in a sense, but I mean, it's the last sport I would ever want to do in terms of how much damage it does to your body. It's actually kind of really depressing how beat up these guys are. And I actually had Diamond Dallas Page on my podcast a couple months ago. It was just a utterly fascinating conversation. So I don't know. Part of it's nostalgia for me because I just grew up on that stuff. So I don't watch like any of the modern stuff. It's just I just want to watch something silly and check out for a little bit. I put it in. I'm not a big sports guy. I like reading. I don't really watch. I don't have any commitments to sports fans. I'm from Philadelphia. I kind of like sports and the Philly teams. Growing up, I'm in Wisconsin now, so got the Brewers hat. Was at a Brewers game not too long ago with my friend Father John. And that was fun. So I like going to sporting events. I just never watch them on TV. I have no allegiances. I mean, it's one of those things when like the conversation turns to sports at any hangout, I just find a different conversation. I'm just not interested. It just bores me to death. Let's see here. Let's see if we can take one more. This is kind of fun because it's kind of a practical question. Mikey says, can you give us 3 quick examples of a weekly fitness, martial art, and Catholic living program? Yeah, sure. I mean, so for Catholics, I mean, like I'm basics on everything, right? What do we do for Catholics? Read scripture, pray the rosary, go to mass, go to confession, right? So at least once a week for mass, try to do your prayers and read scripture every single day. I think at least once a month for confession, at least is a good habit to get in. So there's 3 things there for just trying to live a good. And if you're a family man, it's a family activity, right? So we do prayers as a family. We have family rosary, right? We go to mass as a family, all of them, no exceptions, right? Now, not all of my kids have. None of my kids actually have yet to make their first confession yet, but that will be coming soon. But they always come with me and Christine when we go to confession, so they see us doing it. We want them to see that example, so that's important for us. My son Roan just read the entire Gospel of Luke. He's young, he's really smart, really ahead on his reading. Mira's got a kid's Bible that she's reading, so they're already reading scripture and all that. Martial arts, we're doing jiu-jitsu 3 times a week. So that's I think having a martial art that you do 3 times a week is just about right for a generalist. If you want to like compete and do better, you probably want to increase your frequency. But for me, I'm past my competing days. I don't need to get kicked in the head anymore. Lost enough brain cells. So for me, it's just learning the skill, having fun, staying fit, doing it with my kids. So we do jiu-jitsu 3 times a week. And for fitness, I mean, join Strong On, my friends. Get those. Let me pimp it one more time, right? If you haven't got the best workouts, I'll give you some free advice here too, of course. But if you want to support what we're doing, go over to chroniclesofstrength.com/best-of-year-1. We've got 2 bundle packs. Just you can get 49 workouts or 99 workouts. These are sort of hand-picked workouts from our year 1 of Strong On, sort of an anniversary sale. So just a bunch of generalist workouts. And if you just did 3 of those a week, you'll be in really good generalist shape because we've got workouts for strength, power, endurance, mobility. You did a kind of, 2 strength and hypertrophy workouts a week and 1 kind of conditioning and mobility. I think you would have a really good generalist program. So that's what I would say. Kind of hearkening back to the question about martial arts. Yeah, I would just do, one day, maybe if you want to be really minimalist of pushing, hinging, another day of pulling, squatting, working auxiliary exercises, have 1 day of sort of maybe some more intense complex training. And then on top of the martial arts, you're going to be in really good shape. And then try and walk every day. Try and get outside. Try and walk every day. Sometimes that's one of our favorite ways just to do our prayers. We just do rosary walks and stuff like that. So you kind of get the sunshine, the walk, and the prayers. And it's just take it for what it is, my friends. So last one, Brandon says Macho Man wins the best wrestler contest. Yeah, he's probably him or Sting. I don't know. I mean, Hogan was always my friend, my favorite growing up, but I've come to appreciate other wrestlers as I've aged, of course. I hate to say that old school wrestling's like fine wine, but in some ways it is. It does get better with age. So, all right, my friends, I am going to check out here. Thank you for the amazing questions. This has been an absolutely fun Q&A. I hope that I provided you with some adequate answers and responses, some things to think about. Check out the sale if you want to support what we're doing. Grab yourself some cool workouts. Talking contingency arguments with Michael Lofton tomorrow on Reason and Theology. Have a recent interview up with John DeRosa over at Classical Theism Podcast. Going on an Islamic YouTube channel for another dialogue there later this month. I've got so many interviews and stuff coming up, I can't even keep up. So I'll try and link it over at the Substack and stuff for those who are interested. And yeah, thanks, dudes. Please comment, like, share, subscribe. We'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.